there a big pond in the center? Okay. Are you on the pond? You're on the north. I don't know. It's probably a saddle house there. It is a really cool. We look for it too. You should just put the water there. The wetland is really just
All right, good evening. This is Becky Baker. I am with KLJ Engineering. We were hired by the study team, which is the City of Yankton, South Dakota DOT, and FAA to complete the Apron expansion project at the Chan-Gurney Municipal Airport. The purpose of this presentation is to present the information within the environmental assessment, which is out for public input right now, and to specifically discuss the purpose and need, the range of alternatives, the alternatives that were pulled forward for further analysis, the affected environment, and the environmental consequences of those alternatives. So we'll talk through each of these pieces as we go through. The city, in cooperation with FAA and South Dakota DOT, proposed to expand the general aviation apron at the Chan-Gurney Municipal Airport in Yankton. And we'll talk specifically through each of these steps, but that kind of shows you who the partnership was and what they were looking at. When I refer to apron, it's just the area that those grounded aircrafts can maneuver for loading and unloading as well as fueling. So because FAA was involved, they are a federal agency, which requires then for us to go through the National Environmental Policy Act process. I'm going to talk generally through this process, and then we'll talk specifically through for this apron expansion analysis. So the NEPA process includes the initial purpose and need development, which we look at really what are the needs that were identified from the folks that brought this forward. And then from there we decide upon a purpose of the project, really the mission of what we're trying to accomplish as we go forward. From there we start to come up with, I think, of more of solutions to that problem or to that need and create a whole range of those. And after we've kind of created that range of alternatives, we start to look at what is the environment where those alternatives would occur, and what would be some of the environmental consequences that would come from that. What would be impacted by those alternatives? From there, we kind of go through this decision-making process and select a preferred alternative. We come back to the public for input, which is why we're here tonight. And we, from this step, then complete the project and select an alternative. So let's talk specifically for this airport. The purpose of this project really was to look at how can we enable this airport to efficiently and safely accommodate projected levels of aircrafts at the existing apron. So we looked out 5 years and tried to identify what are the needs of this airport within that existing apron, that area that they're using for loading and unloading and fueling and for parking. And we decided that we needed to increase the number of parking spaces to accommodate those projected parking demands. In addition, we wanted to make sure we maintain that efficient movement too, so the aircrafts can go from the hangar to fueling to the runway while maintaining a TOFA area, which I want to kind of define what that TOFA area is. That is an area that is on the ground centered on the taxiway or the taxi lane, and it really is an area that should be object-free for safety for aircraft's movement. So once we determine our purpose of the project, we wanted to also kind of understand the airport a little bit more, and I wanted to share that these are the types of aircrafts that are utilized at this airport. The ADG-1s are the smaller planes. That picture there kind of shows some examples. And then the next level up is the ADG-2s, which is the next size up of aircraft. Both of these are utilizing this airport currently. So let's take a look at the existing apron and really kind of take a good look at where the parking spaces are available. If you see in the north end there where I kind of have a little note there that says photo 1, there are 6 ADG-1 tie downs available, 4 that are on pavement and 2 that are on grass. An additional ADG-1 parking spot can be found by the fueling station, which is on the east side. They only utilize that though during inclement weather, so we haven't counted that in our numbers for parking spaces. Then if you look on the south side, right north of the barrel hanger, which I want to point out the barrel hanger and the tile hanger at this point, which are both on the south side, there are 3 ADG-1 spots north of the barrel hanger that can be utilized. So now let's look at ADG-2 parking spaces. If you look, they can temporarily park in front of the terminal, which is on the northwest side of the apron there. And they also, in some cases, can take those 3 ADG-1 spots that's on the southwest side there north of the barrel hanger. So as you can see, there's very limited ADG-2 parking. That's what we started to identify the more we analyze this. And if you start to think about if you have hunting season or the aircraft show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, in some cases they can have up to 65 aircrafts that park overnight, and many of them are ADG-2s, so they have difficulty finding parking spaces. Another thing that happens quite a bit is that the barrel hanger, which stores several aircrafts, if your aircraft is in the back of the hangar, they have to remove the hangars in the front and then be able to get to your aircraft. So there isn't a lot of parking spaces in that area. You're going to become kind of congested and stack up at times. So in addition to kind of analyzing the existing apron and the spaces, we looked at, in the next 5 years, 2023, how many spaces are we going to need? And I could walk through the math, but I will leave that to others, and that is within the EA if you want to take a look or if anyone has any questions. But we came to, on a peak day, we need 6 spaces for ADG-1s and 5 spaces for ADG-2s. So as I said, for the NEPA process now, we've kind of come up with our what do we need and what our purpose of the project was. So now we're going to step through what options and alternatives could address that purpose and need. So at this point, I want to kind of point out too, another thing that popped up as we were looking through is the tile hanger. If you look there, it's dark black outline. The tile hanger is located in the existing apron, and the condition of that building has made it to where it can no longer store aircrafts. So since 2012, it has not stored any aircrafts, and there's been kind of conditions, and I've got a few of the items there that have been noted, and it's basically met its life. This building, the structure is no longer useful as far as what the airport needs it to do. So we started to look at what do we do with that tile hanger, what are our options? The first option was the renovation of it at the current location. That would not meet the purpose need of the project. That tile hanger would still be on that existing apron and wouldn't allow for us to expand and to meet the purpose need of what we've determined. It would also still have an adverse effect as well, because there's unique components there, such as the tile, the clay tiles, that if we start to affect it or move it, would be permanently affected. So we would still have a pretty big impact on that building regardless of what we did. Same thing with relocation and renovation. If we were to move that building either on airport property or off, we would have trouble replacing those unique components. And even if we did, we would still have an adverse effect to that structure. And so in the end, it was determined that that building would be demolished, proposed to be pulled forward in all of the alternatives, including the no build. And having that hangar there would mean that, or by removing that, we would remove a building that's really met the life of what it was meant to, and that it would now need to open up that area for the apron to meet our purpose and need for that expansion. So now let's walk through the alternatives. Alternative A is the no-build alternative. So as I mentioned, everything would stay the same on that apron, and we would also remove that tile hanger. So aircrafts would continue to move along there for fueling and to get to the hangars the same as it does today. And that would not meet our purpose and need because we wouldn't solve the issues that were brought up at the beginning. Alternative B would include the removal of that tile hanger and the expansion of the existing apron. 2 ADG2 spots would be added. So we'd have a total of four ADG2 spaces and 6 ADG1 spaces. We would relocate hangars B and C as well. This would meet our purpose and need partially by improving the apron expansion, but it would not be enough ADG spaces to meet it fully. We also want to make sure to do our due diligence and look at expanding the apron in other different locations. There were 2 locations that were brought up that we looked through. The issue with this is that we still have the same issues along the existing apron as are there today. We wouldn't be able to address any of those if we looked elsewhere. This maybe in the future could be looked at, but it wouldn't meet our purpose and need of our existing project. And then we also added an alternative D. This is very similar to B, but we added 2 more ADG spaces than B. So for a total of 6 ADG spaces on the apron and 6 ADG1 spaces. So 4 additional would be added with this alternative. So then we compared the alternatives. Alternative A would be pulled forward regardless, because within the NEPA process we always look at the no build. And alternative D would be pulled forward because it met both of the needs of this project. B came close, but like I mentioned, it doesn't have enough ADG2 spaces for our projected 5-year needs. So going back to kind of the environmental piece of this, we always include kind of this NEPA umbrella. So after we pull the alternatives forward, we start to really narrow down and look at what the impacts would be to each of these alternatives on the environment. And these are all the laws and regulations that go along with that analysis. So a quick summary, we looked at the biological resources. There were no effect. We're going to be within airport property, so habitat is very limited. We also looked at hazardous materials, and something to remember with that one is we also look at not only would we create any issues with that, but could those have past spills affect our current project during construction? There were 4 known sites or spills, but all of the sites are closed, which means they've been remediated, so there are no concerns with that. For cultural resources, we look at historical, architectural, archaeological. We went through and did a historic structures analysis, and the tile hanger and the barrel hanger are both considered historic structures, as well as part of a historic district, which included those 2 structures and a radio tower. I'll talk about those a little bit more here as we go along. We also looked at Section 4F. This is a specific law for US DOT agencies, which FAA is one of them. And so they look at historic structures, parks, recreation areas. There's just an extra layer of protection to resources such as those. And because we had historic structures on this one, we did discuss Section 4F as part of this. And I will cover those structures here in just a little bit. Land use, we're going to stay within the airport property. There's no anticipated impacts to land use. As well as energy supply. Energy use will remain the same. Socioeconomic, there will be some temporary delays to hangar owners during construction, as well as we are, like I said, relocating 2 of the hangars, so those just will be a little bit further away for those owners. Visual effects, we're within the airport. I mean, we are taking down the tile hangar, but we still will not be changing the overall landscape that it is an airport property. And as far as water resources go, there was no considered impacts. So let's talk a little bit more about the structures. In the left-hand side there, you have the tile hangar. In the bottom corner, you have the barrel hangar, and then you also have the radio tower. As I mentioned, the 2 structures are historic, and then all 3 of these together are also considered a historic district. They had importance because they were associated with German POWs that were housed in this area, as well as the Naval Academy here in Yankton. So by removing that tile hangar, we are going to have an adverse effect to those structures, as well as the historic district. We also, remember I mentioned this 4F, we also had to consider that, which means that we would have a permanent incorporation of the tile hangar and the historic district into the airport property, which is something that we need to note. And then the barrel hangar would not have a use underneath that regulatory law. But overall, the consideration was that they had an adverse effect. Alternative A also would, because remember we included that as part of our no build. So due to that adverse effect, we're required to do a MOA, a Memorandum of Agreement, with SHPO, the State Historical Preservation Office, and we are required to come up with mitigation for taking down the structure. The 3 mitigation points that we've come up with, the first is oral history collections. So anyone that remembers this time period remembers those German POWs being housed there, which I have a picture of them up in the left-hand side. This is actually a picture of them working on bank stabilization for the Missouri River. Anyone that has a recollection of those can sure contact me and provide that. The second mitigation measure is recordation. We'll hire some specialists to go out and take specific photography of all 3 buildings, and that will be recorded long-term with SHPO and other archives. And then the third is we will be developing a display board that really tells the story of these structures in the historic district that will hang within the airport terminal, as well as the museum here in town. And from that, I'll kind of summarize with saying, like I said, this is a public input process, so we welcome comments. There are comment sheets in the back, as well as this is open until July 9th for comments. There are environmental assessments located at different public open areas. I think the city has a couple located here in the library. Otherwise, I will open it up for any questions. If anyone has any questions, I'd ask you come up to the podium and state your name and ask those. Okay.
It says elevation 1,400 feet.
Yeah.
Must have been must have sunk a little ways. We're at 1,305.
Well, if I understand it right too, do you mind moving back to that slide? There's some interesting photos. If I understand correctly, the airport was relocated at one point. I don't know the full history of it. But that's what, yeah, and that probably is the exact location, but yeah, we wondered that too. But there's been some interesting photos that we've been able to obtain. Yep. The difference between alternative B and alternative D is 2 additional ADG2 parking spaces. Yep. Yeah. Yep.
So explain process after July 9th?
So after July 9th, we'll work
Timeline.
with, oh, sorry. After July 9th, public comment will end. We will take the public comments, review the document, work with FAA. If nothing outstanding comes out of the comments, then we will work towards wrapping this up with a FONSI, a finding of no significant impact. A preferred alternative will be selected, which at this point would be alternative D, and then we move forward. All right.
What odds do you give that this will be done next year?
Oh, I don't, you know what? I know the environmental assessment schedule. I do not know the design or construction schedule.
As long as there's no impacts through this process, I think the plan still is to have a design grant in place this year, hopefully construction next summer.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.